Hi, I'm Lee. Welcome to the channel. I hope you're having a lovely day. I'm a short, overweight, middle-aged white dude. I've got thinning brown hair, black gloss. I'm wearing a black t-shirt with my new logo on it. Pretty cool, right? And I'm sitting here at the delivery center of Polestar with the lovely Laurissa, who is the head of PR from Laurissa. Laurissa, thank you so much for giving us your time.
It's a pleasure.
So I just had a couple of questions because you very kindly loaned me a Polestar 2 for a while, which was a lovely experience. But I wanted to get a little bit more knowledge about the actual brand of Polestar. So could you, to begin with, give me a little bit of insight into, for those who haven't heard or may not be familiar with the Polestar brand, a little bit about it?
Surely. So Polestar was actually founded 6 years ago by Volvo. So it's now a standalone brand, but some people may remember Polestar from its racing days and the in-house tuning division of Volvo. So the Polestar 2 that you drove was our first all-electric vehicle. We did have another vehicle ahead of Polestar 2 called Polestar 1, surprisingly. And Polestar 1 was actually a hybrid with the longest electric vehicle range at the time when it was first produced, but that didn't come here because it was left-hand drive. So for Australia, it was all about Polestar 2, which we first introduced in February of last year.
As the name of my channel might suggest, I'm not much of a car person, and I believe you are. And it's interesting that a lot of people might think that car people wouldn't really be into electric cars, but I've found most of the electric car people who are really into it have come from being car people. So as a car person, what's that journey been like for you?
I feel like I'm talking out of school here, but when I first got the job, a lot of my friends thought I would hate it, and I thought I would hate it because I'm all about engines and and performance, exactly, the sounds and the manual transmission. And when I got my Polestar 2 and started to live with it, I absolutely loved it. It's probably for that performance side of things. The responsiveness is just like nothing else, and it does feel like you're taking a step back in time when you go back into an internal combustion engine vehicle, of which I have one at home in my driveway, which we need to change over. But no, I think it was all about the performance. It was so simple to use. That Google integration that we have, where you just basically ask Google anything that you need to know, whether it's turning on the air conditioning in the car or if you've got Google Home, you can put on the lights in your house. So that kind of integration is amazing and extraordinary, and the changes and how quickly we can bring technology to market is another sort of positive aspect of this transition to electric vehicles.
Cool. Now, I wanted to get onto something a bit more about the brand. Like, I've done a little bit of reading about Polestar, and I've been really impressed by you're trying to be as transparent as possible and talking about not just, oh, we make cars, we sell cars, they're cool, that's it. But looking at the whole life cycle of the car. So in terms of where the materials for the car and the battery are sourced, what happens to the car once it's not going to be a car anymore, and all that kind of stuff. Could you give me a bit more insight into that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for Polestar, it's always been the position that electrification is just the beginning. It's not the end point, it's where you start. And you don't know where you need to improve unless you measure. And so that's why that life cycle assessment report came along in the first instance. And at the beginning, we actually compared Polestar 2 to an equivalent ICE vehicle, an equivalent petrol vehicle, to have a look at the impact over the life cycle of the car. And what we found is no matter how you charge a Polestar 2, it's still going to have less of an impact than an equivalent petrol car. But if you charge with renewable energy, the impact is less than half. So that's a really significant sort of starting point. But what was different about the way that Polestar approached it was that they shared the methodology for the life cycle assessment report, which they continue to do. So over the past 3 years with the new model year 24, we've actually reduced our impact from sort of cradle to what we call gate, where you hand over the car to the customer, by 3 tonnes. Wow. And that's by introducing some initiatives like moving to low carbon aluminium for wheels and battery casing, changing some of the battery chemistry, but also shifting to renewable energy in the production facility. So all of those small changes can actually have a really big impact over the course of a vehicle's life. And what Polestar was really committed to in terms of that transparency piece that you mentioned was acknowledging that sourcing for raw materials is not straightforward. It's often littered with human rights abuses, there's corruption, and you really need to try and secure ethical sourcing. So Polestar 2 is the first vehicle in the world to introduce blockchain technology to track and trace the cobalt in its batteries. So this tiny little company from Scandinavia has gone, right, well, we're going to do something about this. So that program has since been extended onto these cars. Now we do cobalt, lithium, nickel, mica, and even the leather, which is an animal welfare leather.
Cool. Now, you touched on batteries, and batteries, I think, I mean, yeah, it's a big part of the whole electric car cycle, and something that I'm far from an expert, but I've done a bit of reading.
I'm not an expert either, so just be careful here.
Well, but you can tell me from Polestar's perspective,
Sure.
in terms of like a lot of my family that have gone, oh, you've got an electric car. What happens when the battery dies? And I mean, the first thing is, most cars have most electric cars have got an 8-year warranty on the battery, and it's not like after 8 years suddenly the battery fairies come and the battery just doesn't work anymore.
No.
So yes, it degrades, but it still works fine. But let's say you keep the car for 15, 20 years, whatever, and it gets to the point where the battery's degraded to a point where you're not going to use that battery for the car anymore. What do you, from Polestar's perspective, how have you looked at that part of the cycle?
Well, absolutely, because as part of this sort of integration with these cars, we have over-the-air updates. So that means that no matter where you are in your ownership journey, you're always going to have the latest software. So the whole idea is that the car has to last the distance. So the way that Polestar has constructed its batteries is in a modular sort of configuration, so that you have the battery cells in the modules, up to 27 modules in for example, the long-range dual motor. And what that means is that you can test, right? So instead of just going, oh, well, the battery's not working anymore, we just move the whole thing, you can test these modules. So if after the 8 years you're testing the state of health and you go 1, 2, 3, great, 4, not so good, you can take it out and replace that module. And that's all done through our diagnostics and things like that. The question is then what happens to that module and the battery cells within it. So Polestar's priority is to look at repurposing. So just because it isn't sufficient anymore for a vehicle doesn't mean it's not sufficient for battery storage, for example.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the first priority. And then beyond that, it's about recycling. So if there was something really wrong, or there had been an accident, or it was damaged in some way, the other side is the recycling element. So at the moment, there's a lot of work happening in this space. There's actually a really awesome company in Australia called Renewable Metals who are doing some things in a really different way compared to the way that they're being done overseas. So it's an area that's constantly evolving to look at what you do with the black mass at the end of it. So at the moment, we have obviously a supplier who can take those batteries if we need them to, and they break it all down and recycle to black mass. They send it offshore, which is kind of what the process is in Australia. We don't really have the local capacity to do anything or the capability. So that's where we're working, but we have quite a long time to get this underway. And we're working very closely with the likes of Circular Australia and the FCAI, who is the overriding sort of body for car manufacturers in Australia, and the Electric Vehicle Council. So we're all working in the same direction here, trying to find a solution for not only end-of-life vehicles, but also for end-of-life batteries. But like the head of Polestar's sustainability has said that, working with cars is a dream compared to fashion where she came from. There's lots of metals, and it's not so difficult to manage this sort of circularity and end-of-life process.
Cool. And it's interesting you touched on repurposing the batteries for home and stuff like that. We just got a battery at our house.
Yeah.
Look out for that video, like and subscribe to find out more when that video comes out. I'm getting good at this YouTube thing. But yeah, it's because, I mean, and I'm just going to go on a little, not rant here, but to explain to my viewers, so the batteries in most cars, let's say on average, have a 60 kilowatt hour battery in it. And most home batteries wouldn't be more than 10 to 15 at the most.
Yeah.
So even if you took, I mean, it's really cool. I didn't know about the modular side of your batteries. So you could take that one module, and even though it's not working well enough for the car, but it's maybe working just fine for a home.
Yep.
And so out of that car, you could get 6 modules to power 6 homes almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of work going on in this space, and I think just the speed at which technology is evolving and people are coming up with all different ways of doing things. But the other point that I forgot to make was just that the CSIRO is doing research at the moment into the longevity of batteries, and they're finding really good results. So just because it has an 8-year warranty doesn't mean, as you say, that it's just going to stop working. They're sort of manufactured and designed for longevity. They're not designed to then just stop.
Can we talk a little bit, so other than the battery, are there any more details you can give me about the recycling of the other materials of the car, or is that sort of like just how normal recycling works?
No, well the Polestar 2 is 85% recyclable, and there's another 10% that can be sort of extracted through incineration. But the whole point is that in Australia we really need to get to the stage where we can recycle
Do it
85%,
locally, yeah.
yeah, locally of the vehicle. And there's lots of work being done at the moment with the FCAI around end of life sort of stewardship and what that should look like, because obviously the challenge is that there's so many mixed materials in some cars, and you have to figure out how you pull it apart exactly. So with Polestar 4, which we introduce next year, we actually have introduced a mono material for the interior. So the interior is all the same material. So at the end of its life, it's easy just to take everything out and off it goes to recycle. So that's the sort of the challenge, is to sort of design circularity in at the beginning. That's where we should be as an industry.
I'm really excited about it. Like, that's really cool, because like as a filmmaker, one of the things that I always, when I'm filming, I think about the edit.
Yes.
So it's almost like you're thinking about, when you're making it, you're thinking about how we're going to take it apart, and the fact that you're thinking about it on both ends, I think that's really good.
Well, I mean, 80% of a product's climate impact is determined at the design phase. And so that's why the design teams at Polestar work so closely with sustainability, because they have to address everything right at the very beginning, and you have to understand, you know, what's going to happen all the way through.
And is there a link or something that I can put on the screen now, a place on your website that people can go and find out more about this, and you've got all the information, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Perfect. So link below. Moving on to just another topic, charging infrastructure.
Yes.
So one of the challenges that we had when we did go on our road trip with the Polestar 2, it wasn't a huge thing, but the charging infrastructure could be better. I thought the Polestar 2 did a pretty good job in terms of, like you say, with the Google stuff that's built in, where it was smart enough to kind of go, okay, go to that charger, then go to that charger, and things like that. But of course, you can't control necessarily what the charge is going to be like when we get there and things. So what can you do, or what are you looking at doing to try and, to try and make that better for people?
Yeah, it's absolutely an area that's evolving all the time. And I know what you're saying, because, you know, in January we had a journalist take a car from Sydney to Perth, and I always get stuck at South Australia. So I was rapt when I heard that the RAA was rolling out a whole network of charging there. The government's committed to this backbone straight through the centre of Australia. And I think actually the Victorian government has just come out with another announcement of another over 200 sort of charge points in Victoria. So it's really important that between government and industry, we're always moving forward. There's the investment there, because I think at one point it was sort of chicken and egg. There weren't quite enough cars, there weren't quite enough chargers, but now there are a lot of cars on the road, and the infrastructure needs to catch up. And it's this sort of challenge that, you know, is replicated in other parts of the world, like the United Kingdom, where they have some of the same challenges, but they're doing a much better job with high density, sort of locations. So I think that there's some trials happening in Sydney very soon about, on-street charging, and that's what we really need. It's okay for people who have, a detached house and a garage, but what happens if you don't actually have that? Because the majority of charging is going to take place in the home.
Yeah.
And I think, Australians have, obviously we have one of the world's highest uptakes of solar, but it's quite a significant number. It's 30 or 40% of all Australian households. So that would suggest that there's a lot of potential there in terms of EV uptake for people who have got solar on their properties. But absolutely, it's about finding these solutions for people who don't live in a detached home. So that really the challenge then becomes what happens if you're on the road doing a road trip when we have those sort of peak periods around Christmas and Easter and school holidays.
Yeah. Well, I will just sort of a little bit more details. I'm almost going to repeat what you said, but sort of my little anecdotal angle of it is that so we have a house, we charge at home majority, and this is the interesting thing with when the objection comes up of what happens when the charges are down or whatever, that's when you're doing long road trips, as you say, whereas most of the time you're charging at home. And what I've found, so for example, my friend Simon, he doesn't have a garage and things like that, so he sort of said, well, how's an electric car going to work for me? And I gave him an example of, I found sort of 2 or 3 council charges that are available around him. And so few people sort of stop to think about it, where you don't drive your petrol car to empty every week.
No,
so
I almost did, but I can actually give you an anecdote on that. So the other thing is that I know firsthand, because for 18 months I had a Polestar 2, but no home charging infrastructure. And I don't know why it took me quite so long, because now I do have it and it's been life changing. but I kind of changed the way that I thought about the car. So I would, some mornings go for a walk with my friends early in the morning, and I'd be charging at 6:30 in the morning at the local charger. But I knew which chargers were sort of located around me. So I knew that if the charger in my local town wasn't working, or if there was a challenge or there was a queue, I knew that there was another one in the next town or another one on the freeway. And I was the queen of, I have 15 minutes to charge, and however much I get, I get. So you kind of, and I live sort of 80 kilometres out of Melbourne. So it was, sometimes flying by the seat of your pants, but you get a real feel for the car, and you don't get worried about that, oh, I've got 20% left, I'm going to have to charge. Sometimes if you have to go a bit lower, you go a bit lower, and it's not going to do any damage to the battery. I mean, they're robust, so you can do that. But it is about just having a little bit more of a think about what's around you, and then just fitting it in, whether it's when you go to the gym or when you go to do your shopping at Coles or Woolies, and just sort of fitting it into your lifestyle.
We'll see, so Simon and I were actually up in Barranduda a couple of weeks ago, and the IGA there's got an amazing setup. So they've got solar panels on the roof. The parking lot has got solar panels as the roof for the parking lot. They've got 4 chargers there, and this is genius. So the chargers are free, which is funny because I spent 5 minutes trying to work out how to pay for them, and then I was like, oh, I just plug it in, duh. So those chargers will charge your car for 20% for free. So the idea is when you go to your shopping, you go to the shopping once a week, you plug in, you get 5-10% into the battery while you're shopping, and away you go. Right. So it's the way of the future.
I mean, I'm not the usual Australian, so the average distance that we travel is 34 kilometres a day. I travel 160 sometimes if I'm going up and back into Melbourne and out again. So I was a very different different sort of case, but I knew exactly how much charge, where I could do it fast, where I could do it more slowly. And it's about that, that sort of feeling around, you don't need to have a fast charger, you need to have a power point. A 240 volt will be fine. So even if you go away for the weekend, you can just plug it in the garage or on an outside power point, and you're fine to go again the next day.
Yeah, it's always funny how, like I was saying to someone a while ago, if only everyone could just get an electric car for a week and live with it, so many of the concerns that people have would just like, my wife's a perfect example where when we first got an electric car a year ago, if we were going anywhere, no, we've got to have 100% when we start, and we've got to do this and whatever. Yeah. And the weekend when I got the Polestar 2, I picked it up a fair way away from where I live, and by the time I got home it was down to 50%, and we were going to Queenscliff for the weekend, and by the time we got to get to Queenscliff we were saying we were going to get down to 20%. A year ago my wife would have been freaking out. And she was like, oh yeah, whatever, because she knows when we get to the big 4 that we were going, like we checked if we could plug it in, we just got to the cabin, plugged it in overnight, we were fine.
No, I agree. And even for me, there are some days where, when you get to 5% on a Polestar 2, you get a turtle icon, and it starts to count you down, saying, you're getting low, you're going to need to charge. And so, there would be times where I was, I pulled in once, and I pulled up to the charger with 2% left, and as I pulled in, it got down to 1%. Oh, I'm sure there's more in the tank. So, but I was like that with petrol. I would always get down to empty, like without fail. So my behaviour hasn't actually changed at all, going from a petrol car into an electric vehicle. But that's just me.
Beautiful. So looking ahead, you mentioned the Polestar 4, but the Polestar 3 is coming out before that.
Yes.
And I was super excited when I saw the presentation about the Polestar 3 because I need a bit more space than what the Polestar 2 has. I was a little less excited when I saw the price. Yes. Now, I'm not saying the value's not there. I understand all the bits and pieces, and that's what it costs. Discuss.
So Polestar is really pushing into the luxury segment, and Polestar 3 is kind of that first halo product that arrives for Polestar. So actually, September, we're going to have Polestar 3 on display on the east coast of Australia. Cool. So there'll be an event in Sydney in late September to launch there. There'll be an event in Melbourne and Brisbane for customers, and then they'll come back into our sort of space location. So in Melbourne it'll be in Chadstone, in Sydney it'll be Alexandria, Queensland, Bowen Hills, and at one point it will go over to the AEVA show in Perth, and that's the plan at the moment. So more and more people will be able to see it and experience the next level in terms of luxury fit out and quality materials. It's a new sort of bastion in terms of sustainable materials. So we start using things like a flax composite that was first shown in Precept as our sort of commitment car to what was coming down the track.
There are a lot of words there I didn't understand.
Okay. So the flax composite is all about reducing virgin plastic in the car. And so this is all part of Polestar's, Polestar Zero project, where we're trying to get to the point of having a totally climate neutral vehicle by 2030. But in order to do that, you need to address all the emissions in your supply chain. You need to have more sort of bio-based materials and sustainable materials in the car. You need to have renewable charging, and of course, you need to have sort of this huge push towards the sort of finish line for 2030. So as part of this sort of evolution of every product that we bring in, we're reducing our impact, we're looking at new materials, and Polestar 3 is really the sort of the first car to come out with all of that and more. It's on an all-electric platform. It has all the bells and whistles in terms of technology in the car, and adaptive suspension, air suspension, and there's lots in that car. So it is very much built like a hamburger with a lot at the very, very top end, and that's with the dual motor. So eventually there will be a single motor version of the Polestar 3, which will make the entry point a little bit more palatable for some of our customers. But then once Polestar 3 is in market, then the next one to come is Polestar 4. And despite that nomenclature, which sounds like 2, 3, 4, and this is something that everybody comments on, but it's actually going to be 2, 4, 3. So Polestar 4 will sit between Polestar 2 and Polestar 3 and give people an entry point into a Polestar SUV that's not at the very top end of a Polestar.
And are there any dates that you can give me on 4, or still don't know?
So 3 should be in market by the middle of next year, 2024, and Polestar 4 will be shortly thereafter. So Polestar 4, I think at this stage, is still Q3 to arrive next year. And that hasn't been impacted at all. There were some software delays on Polestar 3, but Polestar 4 has its own sort of production schedule. So they'll arrive quite close together. And so it's a very exciting year for us in 2024 as we really push into the SUV market, which in Australia is, over 50%.
Market.
Yeah, it's where you need to be. So it's a really, they're great products to have coming on board, and I think that will really help people to, reposition the perception of Polestar as more of a luxury performance offering.
Well, Laurissa, thank you so much for giving me your time. I really
Pleasure.
appreciate you letting me come and set up. And it's funny because you suggested filming at Chadstone.
I did.
And I love the spaces. I like the industrial sort of gritty kind of look, and I think it's a lovely space. So
well, I think we would have been interrupted in Chadstone anyway. Somehow there probably would have been quite a few people wondering.
There's that too. So yeah, if you're in Melbourne, come down and have a test drive. It's well worth a try. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for coming, Lee. Really.
No, thank you. If you have found this helpful, if you found this useful, please like and subscribe. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for your support, and we'll catch you on the next one. Safe and happy driving. I mean, I don't have any bloopers, so I don't know what I'm going to do about that.
Happy days.
Yeah, just knock me on the head or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the Polestar's PR.
Yeah, just drop the boom on my head. There we go. That'll do it. Well, if you're looking for anyone to do long drives in the Polestar 3 when you got some available. Yeah.
I probably will need to get it across to Perth. So if you want to do a drive to Perth.
Yeah, no, seriously, we'll do it. We'll
Road
do
trip?
it. Yep, absolutely.
Done.